一直以来很想做一些访问，关于潮流时尚。
Hi everyone and welcome to Touch London's first live conversation. Today I'm joined by Gabrielle Shiner Hill from Bureau 555 and explain a little bit about the concept of our live chats. Touch London is a creative agency specialising in footwear and accessories, and we also work with emerging designers and connecting them with industry professionals. And we thought it'd be really nice to have kind of live chats where we discuss emerging concepts, emerging changes within the industry, and just kind of shine a light on new ways to do things and give more information to people. So I'll hand over to Gabby.
Hello, hi Lou, thank you for having me. So my name is Gabrielle Shiner Hill, I'm from Bureau 555. We're a digital agency based out of London and Dhaka, Bangladesh, and we specialise in material digitalisation for 3D softwares, which is a process where we actually take the physical fabrics that are being made and we convert them into digital fabrics so that you can make 3D garments within the supply chain. So,
how do you see that kind of being integrated within businesses? Are you seeing that? Are you seeing people open to it, or is there a real interest at the moment, I can imagine?
Yeah, well obviously since the pandemic we've seen quite a lot of a rise in softwares like Clo and Browseware and Optitech specifically for the supply chain. And for the last year we've been talking to brands, retailers and manufacturers to understand what their digital needs are.
Yeah.
Because there are a number of sort of global retailers that have been working in the digital space for the last 5 or 7 years, and now everyone's looking across and thinking, oh, okay, this is really interesting. What can digital product creation do for me? How can it speed up my supply chain? What are the sustainability benefits? What are the time cost benefits? What do I need within my workflow? What do I need within my team? So right now, everyone we're talking to is interested in digital product creation, and it depends where they are on that journey as to whether they're ready to move forward with material digitalisation.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, because I assume one of the benefits is, you mentioned sustainability, because it obviously cuts down a lot of sampling, a lot of waste. In footwear and accessories we see a massive over-sampling trend within businesses, even just to change a slight colour or a binding or a lace. There's always a new sample request, so I'm assuming that will help kind of like minimise.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, the reason why we got into this business is actually both myself and my business partner from a textiles background. My business partner is also director of a textile mill, and my background is all product development, so in garments rather than footwear. And I've seen firsthand the oversampling. I have been party to it. I have been that oversampler, like, you know, hands up, it was me. And if we look at some of the figures, so in one of our case studies, one of our partners actually creates 17,000 samples a month. So those are garments that will never go to the shop floor. No customer will ever see them. They are specifically for product development and design development purposes. And that's not to point a finger at that person, that is to shine a light on our industry at the oversampling problem we've got ourselves into, because we've become used to it.
Yeah.
So if we can replace a physical garment sample with a digital sample, we can see a 96% reduction in carbon emissions. So it takes 4% of the carbon to make the digital sample compared to the physical sample. That's based on a study done by the Fabricant and Peak Performance. And we're about to do our own studies actually internally. We'll have that data hopefully in 4 to 6 months. But the sort of like the carbon reduction potentials are really, really important in this area. And also, as designers and product developers, our nature is we want to see it in different colourways, different print sizes, different variations, short or long sleeve, different hem sizes. We want to see those variations so we can make the decisions around buying the product. And that's where digital sampling can really, really help.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's amazing that it makes that much difference. And like, we're definitely in the era where we're, you know, it's about regen now. We've taken so much from the planet and we need to stop taking, we need to start replacing, putting back. And I guess this is just like one of those perfect solutions where that's a huge reduction.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
virgin
amazing.
raw materials we should obviously not be using. I think most of us in this space can probably agree with that. But even if we're thinking about anything within closed loop as well, if every time you action a garment sample, you're essentially asking a mill to make you 30 metres of fabric, because you can't make just 5 metres of fabric. The mills don't run on those efficiencies. They have to run it through the machines. You can't finish a fabric on 5 metres. So it's understanding that every time these decisions are made to action a sample, what are the ramifications down the supply chain? And therefore, if you know those ramifications, how can you improve your workflow and process with digital sampling? That's where we kind of find it really important and want to work in. If you're going to start working digitally, which so many companies are really investigating thoroughly at the moment, you have to have a library of tools. You have to have a toolkit, because you can't go from a blank piece of paper. If you're making a tech pack for anything, you know, footwear, apparel, accessories, you're very rarely starting with just a blank Illustrator page. You're building from other things, right? So you have to have a library of fabrics, you have to have a library of blocks, you have to have a library of trims, if you want your design teams and your product development teams and your technology teams to be successful with digital. And again, thinking about the fact that who's doing this work, it's not just that one designer in the corner who likes the tech stuff. And at the moment, that's kind of what we're finding. It's one designer who's willing to take on that challenge, but it's thinking about everyone in your workflow. So your designers, your product developers, your fabric technologists, your garment techs, everyone has to be brought in to designing digitally in the same way that they would be brought into developing a tech pack, a bill of materials and a production pack. You feed all that same information into a digital garment. It shouldn't be any different. If you're designing a digital garment that is going to then be made physically. That's exactly,
So that actually moves on quite nicely to the next kind of question. Well, actually, it's nice to kind of think about design teams evolving into that as well, because I feel like there's a bit of a gap in terms of, if you're a designer within a business or a company, often you're looked at as you can design anything, and especially within footwear and accessories, it's such a specialist kind of design aesthetic that even the difference between like a classic or a formal shoe to like a sneaker, and then a sneaker to a performance or a wide fit, there's so many specialities, leather design, trim design, they all need specialist designers, and I feel like we've kind of lost that a bit. So hopefully the emergence of digital design, it can bring everything together, bring those teams together working in a more functional way.
I mean, I would hope so, because if we think about, you talked about the trims, for example, so all the trim suppliers are developing their trims in 3D, right? So some people like YKK, SAB, they're all developing their products in 3D, so you can get them straight into Clo or Browswear, or you can go to, you know, they're giving them out themselves as well. And it's remembering, again, you've got a digital product, you've got a physical product, and if you want to remember, like if you want to just change that, it takes work digitally and it takes work physically as well. We know that, I think most people know who develop trims know that you have to create a die, you have to create a mould if you want a different size, a different effect, those kind of things. But when you first start out designing, it's a bit of a shock to discover, I think, that, wait a second, I want that button, I want it like, you know, 2 lines bigger. Well, that's going to cost you $250 US just to get the mould for it. So hopefully bringing some of that back into the teams, it'll be like, no, remember, every single thing we do has a reaction down the chain, I think.
Definitely. And it's interesting you touched on whether you're designing in a digital way for the digital assets, or actually it's going to be made physically.
Yes.
Because obviously there's a big emergence within concept designers, digital design, especially within sneakers. We've seen like really futuristic stuff coming through, like out of this world concepts, really streamlined space-like themes, and then cartoon, really joyous, fun, poppy stuff's coming through. And then recently we've seen this all like hyper texture and like almost like they look like they're alive. All, you know, the shoes are coming alive. They're so detailed and so like hyper. You just want to touch them all the time. So yeah, I guess.
So specifically touch, right? When we can't touch anything, we are using our other senses. So we are looking, our our vision and all of our other senses are heightened. So what we're seeing within the digital materials that are being made, we're seeing this in footwear, we're seeing this in apparel, is that they are becoming hyper tactile, exactly as you said, and you almost feel like they are tangible and tactile. You can feel them, they are there, and that is because, well, one, we believe it's the digital designers and graphic designers who are flexing their muscles. They're showing like what they can do within the softwares they've got, which is really interesting to see. So hair and water, all of those things which are really difficult to actually render, those are kind of being showcased at the highest level. But also, as anyone who is working within the digital and crossover to the physical space, when you no longer can touch a product, you heighten everything else. So you want to zoom in really far. You want to see the hair on the fabric. You really want to zoom in, actually, 10 times more than you would be able to ever do in real life, because you've lost that sense of touch. So that's what we're seeing in some of the design work that's coming out, these hyper vivid, hyper realistic, tactile materials that are almost trying to make up for the fact that you can't touch them. Yeah, and even hyper colour as well, like really, really kind of like intense colours coming through and shine, which we wouldn't necessarily have in the real world or the physical world, let's say.
Yeah, it's so interesting to see that kind of, what's that going to do to us in like 100 years? Like, what's that going to do to our brains? How will it evolve?
I mean, even there are haptic gloves that are being created, so we'll be able to touch the fabric digitally and feel it, which will, because we haven't resolved that between the digital physical product crossover. Like, you still have to touch the fabric, right? And as textile first people, we would never say that you shouldn't be touching it. But we can definitely see that the technology is moving towards that area, so we can just have small feelers, hopefully, or small sections. So again, we're reducing down that use to kind of like make large samples of fabric just for us to kind of like for our senses to be validated, essentially, at the end of the day. So how do you see it kind of emerging into the physical world? Because obviously I feel like, because it's such a new concept for people to kind of get around in how to kind of integrate it within their businesses, maybe they don't know how easy or how difficult it can be to integrate digital design, or what they can actually make or what they can actually produce. Is there kind of a disconnect, are you seeing? Or? At the moment, there seems to be a disconnect between the brands that have it in-house. They're designing digitally in-house through the available softwares for apparel like Chloe, Browseware, Optitex, and then they're asking the supply chain to design the digital garments for them as well. And there is a disconnect between aesthetic, quality levels, quality standards, and what they're kind of getting back and forth. But if we think about production and how the big brands have very rarely produced in-house, or very rarely in the last 50 years produced in-house, and they have actually made everything offshore. They're trying to replicate that same model where they're producing the digital garments offshore as well. But you need that skill set offshore to produce the digital garments as well. The skill set of like fantastic textile technologists, amazing master pattern cutters, then those have to be translated into working in the digital area as well. I think it's very unlikely that the brands will be designing all of this in head office. It's unrealistic, it's unrealistic for time. It doesn't make sense that you then deliver a digital product to your physical manufacturer and they don't understand how to convert that. So it has to be co-created between the manufacturer and the brand. We believe if you want a successful digital relationship, there has to be that level of co-creation where you're sharing assets, where you're training each other actually, and that is a different step in direction where the brands aren't necessarily used to. They may support them in one way, within the manufacturing base, but it is actually becoming more of a partnership, and that's what's being requested by the brands of the manufacturers, and the manufacturers back to the brands as well. I think that really sits in line with like what's going on kind of in the industry or economically and globally, though, in terms of like businesses are starting to share assets, they are starting to share information, some are even starting to share like factories or manufacturing ideas, materials, dead stopping. There's all these initiatives going along, and it is kind of the way forward. It builds that community. I guess with digital it's quite similar to the gaming community. That's why I'm a bit obsessed with it, because it's just so sharing and like supportive, and Totally, open source, sharing these things. So the open source file format, even, you know, there's a U3MA file format. It's open source. It's been developed for the industry. Not all the softwares buy into it currently at the moment, but you know, we can work on that one.
Yeah.
But I think, speaking from someone who's worked in the industry for the fashion textiles industry for the last 20 years, you know, the fashion industry thrives on secrecy, let's be honest. The supply chains thrives on secrecy because that's their IP, that's, you know, that's your manufacturing route, and that's your route that you're comfortable with, and you don't want to share that information. We understand that. However, in the brave new world that we are in, you know, transparency is part of, it's what we're asking of brands.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're asking actually brands to share information. We're seeing people are reporting their manufacturing bases, you know, and that's actually a positive thing for the brands. So therefore, working in partnership with your manufacturing base is only going to be a good thing for the brands and the retailers that want to do this. And then that will hopefully also help, you know, the smaller brands that are actually pioneering digitally, like, because, you know, some of the small brands are doing it, you know, been doing it for 5 years. They're like, what's the problem? It's the bigger workhorses that are.
Yeah, it's so much harder to go back and change, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's why at Touch we work with businesses and brands to really try and implement it from the beginning.
Yeah.
And try and get these kind of ways, just mindsets of how we should be working for the future. So if anyone was interested in kind of like learning more about it, or wondering how they could maybe implement it, or even just start to look into it, what would you suggest in terms of
Within digital product creation?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would say if you're a designer that currently designs in the traditional format, let's say, you know, it's, you know, Illustrator and that, your tech packs and working with factories, my suggestion would be is that you start to understand how you can build a digital garment, and think about it in exactly the same way that you're building a physical garment. Think about the fact that you have a material and that you need a digital material. So if you just snap a picture with your iPhone and give that image of the material no depth, your garment will look like it has no depth.
Yeah.
If you're taking the pattern of your garment and it's not sitting correctly on the avatar, it won't sit correctly on the body. You have to consider it in the same way, and you have to work with many different people actually to be able to get that looking correct. So I would say that consider the digital garment, that you're crafting it in the same way that you're crafting your physical garment. If you scrimp on your trims, your digital garment won't look any good. If you scrimp on your render, which is equivalent to your physical garment finishing, it's not going to look as good. So it's thinking about the quality. So at the very beginning, it's setting your quality standards. What quality do you want? If you're going to work with someone that's going to create digital garments for you, you have to be very upfront at the beginning about what you want out of the end of it. Your poses, the avatar, the quality, the resolution size, what outcome are you looking for, as opposed to, you know, here's my tech pack, please convert it into digital garment. It's not quite the same. It's exactly the same. If you like, okay, you've got a pair of, you know, you've got this, I don't know, 5 pockets, but is it garment dyed, or is it piece dyed? Is it finished? Is it washed? Is all of these things you have to consider in the same way. So I think it's making sure that you're going into it with your eyes open. Software-wise, there's so many to choose from. So I would hesitate to kind of give software recommendations.
But I guess it's also like, because I was speaking to one of my friends about our chat we were going to have, and they were like, oh, okay, so it's for the metaverse. It's like it's closed for the metaverse. And I was like, no, like it's actually it can be for any product. It can be for any. It can be for core product, or
it can. I mean, the product that we're doing, our bread and butter product, is core products. We are scanning those core products that you see on the shelves. If you go into, you know, and you see all those value chinos, those are designed digitally. Those should be designed digitally. You do not need to see 20 colours of the same chino in a product wrapped up in a range planning room, right? We can all agree on that. So it's using it for the easy product. Get an easy win with digital, because the people who are pushing further are now doing sort of like, you know, laces and glitters and women's wear and lingerie, which is quite challenging. On the other hand, what I would say for apparel, tailoring products is really expensive. $250 US to $300 US just to make one tailored jacket. If you can then actually do that in 2 to 3 hours in a digital garment just for a visual render, then that's a no-brainer as well. So it's not saying that you should necessarily start with core product, but core product's the easy win for sure. But then I would encourage anyone to experiment with their high cost, low volume products, because then you're not spending that money on sampling. You could be spending it digitally and then be happy with it at that point.
So interesting. It's so, I mean, it's just should be becoming part of, well, it is, digital is part of our everyday life. We're online, half the world is online all the time.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see it coming into the manufacturing side at such a kind of like all level. It's encompassing everything, and the positive impact it can have is, and also I think like it's creating a new injection of creativity into an industry that's been quite dull for a while. So it's like, yeah, it's learning new skills, and people should maybe be open to it and not so worried.
No, I do agree with you, and I did a presentation during last week to a large retailer, and there was a younger member of the sustainability team in the room. When I say younger, I mean under 30. Yeah. A member of the sustainability team in the room, and he just said, well, why aren't we making all of our product like this? And everyone else in the room agreed with him. We were like, yeah, no, totally. Why aren't we making all of our product digitally? Because he did not see the barriers, which for us who've been in the industry longer, I can see the barriers. I can understand why it's scary and why there is resistance and why change management is needed. But for someone who's coming into the industry, and designing and developing and building sustainable strategies in the industry, if we can get to that person and say, you know, digital product is the way forward, where you can reduce your carbon emissions, you can reduce your water usage, your chemical usage, and your sampling, quick wins, he can see it, then hopefully everyone else can see it.
Oh, it's been so interesting talking to you, and I'm sure people are going to learn loads and have lots of questions, and sometimes it's nice to just kind of have an open conversation about these things, because like we just mentioned, it can be a bit intimidating, but there are people there that can like you speak to about it, and
I think that's the benefit. There's quite a lot of information out there, but it can feel slightly overwhelming, I think, at the moment. So yeah, people are welcome to get in touch if they have any questions around digital materials or digital garments. But I would just encourage the general research as well, because there's quite a lot going on in our space at the moment.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you.